Why? So early this year there was military coup in Burkina Faso, and it created such a wave across what most of us have access to, social media. But there's more that precedes that. There were more military uprisings within the Sahel region. And this is why I have this guest with me. His name is Eric. He will introduce himself and then tell us a little bit about the military uprising in the Sahel region. I like saying Sahel region. Okay, in the Sahel region. So, karibu.
Shukran sana. My name is Macharia Eric Maina. What you would refer to as mchanganuzi wa masuala ya kigeni na ya kisiasa.
Interpretation?
I'm basically a commentator on international power politics and those of diplomacy as well. Yeah, thank you for having me here once more.
Thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be back. On the topic for today, which is basically what we're trying to discover or talk a little bit about the military insurrections or the military revolutions in West Africa, particularly the Sahel region. The Sahel region being the mostly arid and basically the north, mostly the north, towards areas where the Sahara Desert has encroached a bit into, where there has been quite a bit of instability for quite a while.
Right.
Yeah. So just to mention a few things, maybe a small history of the place.
Okay.
So the Sahel region is a pretty unique region in Africa in that the whole of it exists under different economic and political structures, as opposed to even their, let's say, neighbors. You find that one of the commonalities that they have is that they were all colonized by the French. So still under French influence until now. And in fact, even the economy is still under French influence. And they've really had a spate of really long periods where you have had either military rulers serving. I think I think they hold the record
of the longest
the longest serving leaders anywhere on the continent, because on average I think any leader who's been elected or maybe got in power by other means has been in power for let's say on average more than 20 to 30 years.
Right, but the Burkina Faso was the recent irregularity to that norm, right?
Yeah. Burkina Faso, the man who got kicked out had been there for 28 years.
Is it 28 or 10 years? Because
there was 28 and then 10.
And then 10
years
right?
later.
So then, sorry. Okay, so 28, then military invasion, then military, and then 10, right?
Yeah.
And then when he was there during the 10, he again he succeeds to change the constitution so that he can stay for longer, right?
Yeah.
And then as a result, there was
kicked out.
Yes, the recent coup, right? So what you forgive me if I am if I'm paraphrasing this wrongly, but what I hear is that the Sahel region generally does not take too kindly to change in terms of politics, in terms of new government and things like that.
I think really what you would consider the problem in the Sahel is that it never really got an opportunity to define itself.
Okay.
Especially most of the countries within the region, because after independence, I think most countries, whether they went through a period of peace or whether there was conflict in the middle, for some way of in some form, they were able to define themselves and like their destiny.
Okay.
If you look at, I'll just mention a few examples. If you look at Tanzania, once they got independent, they decided to roll back from who they were. They wanted to use Ujamaa, basically a version of African socialism, to try and define their future.
Themselves. Okay.
You see, so it didn't work, but at least they tried. The same thing that happened in Zambia, is it Zambia, under Kenneth Kaunda with humanism. Even in South Africa, Kenya did the same thing as well with session of paper number 10, and they did Ethiopia. But if you look at West Africa, they never really got that opportunity. Because
even as you said, they still are under quote-unquote direct colonial rule.
Yeah.
Because as you explained to me earlier, and I think you've mentioned as well, the resources are still controlled by, say, the French government.
Yeah.
So having covered that's first of all where we say tulipata uhuru but not yet uhuru, right?
Yeah.
At the very least we're able to say that this is a region that cannot be able to say that they have had self-determination, right?
No.
So now, walk me through the recent period, because as you have said, it has been a region with a lot of conflict, but it's also a very rich region in a very rich mineral, uranium, very rich resource. Yes, so walk me through the recent history that is leading us to this. I mean, there has been one occupation after the other, one after the other. This country, there's an uprising, then the next country, and then it's like, you know how Okitoba pupils, then they just,
So, this probably all started with ISIS, but probably, for those who've been following politics, especially geopolitics within the African context, there has been a recent rise in what they call Islamist militants. You would note there was a case with Nigeria with Boko Haram that affected more than one country. It basically affects Nigeria, Niger, basically the countries that are around that region. The other will be.
Should we pause? It's fine. Okay, sorry.
So the rise of Islamist insurgency in Africa has a direct correlation with what is going on. When it happened in CAR, which is now the central the central arm of the France-Afrique policy, the French, when the Seleka and the Balaka, when they were fighting, the government saw that there was a huge lapse in security.
Okay.
The French who had come in to help them out were not really doing much, and the chaos was still going on. So nothing happened until they decided to bring in the Russians.
Okay.
So when that happened, there was a bit of there was a change in the security situation in the country. That way, which is something most people didn't know, but the government was not able to extend its own authority outside the capital.
Okay.
And the CAR is a very it's a very rich and pretty significant country. Very rich, has a lot of gold. So I think when the West saw this, there was also a bit of unsatisfactoriness, especially with the population, in how their own governments, especially are dealing with the security situation. Remember, the insurgents were really. They were really gaining ground. So when they invited, I think it's called the G5, which is the Western bloc of France-Afrique. When they invited the French in under Operation Bakane, which was outside the UN mission there to try and fight the Islamists, they really didn't get much ground.
Okay.
And even after the operation changed to Takuba, which is now a bit recently, which was now supposed to be an elite unit, basically only special forces going to take on the Islamists. Nothing really changed. So I think the people got fed up.
Okay.
And that's why you see they started now fighting. And remember, this comes the coup in Mali, the first one.
Which was in 2020.
Yeah. Came after a village in northern Mali was attacked.
Yeah.
And I think the Islamists did quite some damage. So I think and it had there was national uproar about this, especially towards the government, and that's when the protests began. when that happened, there was a lot of pressure, and the government actually got kicked out. I think the neighbors actually saw this, and this now started off a spiraling effect within the region. So once the transitional government came in and they saw that basically nothing is really changing, I think the military just decided to take over
again.
Yeah, and now go themselves into this, and now basically not leave their own security into the hands of other people. And
this is done by it's evidenced by the change of the constitution and the change of the entire structure of government, right? Yeah. So now you have mentioned two factors. You have mentioned the internal factors, which the people were dissatisfied that they felt that their security was not being taken care of. Yeah. So there's the general displeasure within the citizens of the governing parties, right? Number one. Then number two, there's the external pressure, which is number one, which is one, existing colonial ties, and two, extremist militants, right? So then now there's internal interference, there's external interference. Does this then point that democracy, the rule of democracy within that region, first of all, does not ever have a chance, and two, it has failed, if it was even there in existence?
No, I think democracy isn't necessarily on let's say on the sick bay, as we would say in the area, but it is also important to note that democracy isn't really the same. Every democracy is, democracy is what's the word? It's personalized depending on the region, the country, the history, the culture, and all that. Yeah? So Western democracy, I would say, isn't really, and this is basically going to the whole of Africa as a whole. If you really look at it, and you'll really note that Western democracy doesn't really, the Western version of democracy doesn't really pair that well with Africa. But the countries that have been able to adapt their own
version of
their own cultures, their own beliefs, their own morals into this framework of democracy have been driving. A very good example is Botswana. So I really wouldn't say that it's really on the sick bay, but however, what they are trying to do, which is like copying a system of governance from the outside and then trying to bring it in for themselves. They are basically trying to copy and paste. That has a problem, and I think it is evident. Then again, what exactly is this democracy that we're talking about? Because again, the leaders who've been there have been there for such a huge period of time. Really, it's the same form of governance from the 80s. Basically same forest, different monkeys.
True. So then, why I keep coming back to the Burkina Faso situation is because I found it quite interesting that when the president again decided to extend his term, is when there was a military uprising. Now the response by ECOWAS, number one, was quite stern towards that, and saying this is just a transitional government, it should remain as that. And this is months later, and there's no conversation towards that, right? So that means that military occupation is actually, quote unquote, successful for this couple of months. Now, would this spark more military protests, and would this extend past the Sahel region into perhaps the sub-Saharan region as well, considering that the quote unquote president of Burkina Faso now, the one who overthrew the government, is trained by the US, right? So then that means that people who are in the AFCON, who are trained by the US, kind of possess the same military skills and strategies. So is this a thing we see being passed down? Is this like a spark that began in Sahel region that just might catch on to sub-Saharan Africa, spread into Africa simply because of the invasion of say the US and the French and I think from 2020
let me just correct you a bit.
Okay.
So what is happening in by the militaries in West Africa isn't really an occupation, because if you use the word occupation, it means that it's a foreign force coming into your own homeland and now
occupying that land. Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
So the revolutions by the military in West Africa, in the Sahel region, I think it's mostly governed by, I mean, it's one of the biggest influences of why the military is taking up is because, one, they're really finding more the situation in the areas, what the citizens are really looking at most is security. So who secures the nation?
It is the armed forces.
It is the armed forces who secures the nation. So they have such an inclination, or the citizens have an inclination to support the military over the civilian government, mostly because they are fed up with the civilian government, especially if you look at the economy, which is basically working against the civilian government in West Africa, especially those in the Sahel region. So they have an incentive now. They have an incentive. The population is looking towards security, and the people who provide, and they are blaming the government for the lack of security. So the security forces now have an incentive to now take over power there. They're doing it quite well. Now, on the issue of ECOWAS, you'd note that ECOWAS is built, I mean, is made up of countries that had that were both colonized by, basically have a French and British legacy, at last in their colonial past. So it raises a bit of questions, because the governance structures are very different. Okay. So when you have elected leaders, you have a block where elected leaders are basically determining the fate of the block, and then you have a few coups around. It will obviously raise
of course it
concern.
Is disturbing.
Yeah, because now you're worried if these people continue this way, what are the chances that in my own country,
to my place,
this will do? Because you see, it's a block, and I think that is why they are trying to be tough. At the same time, they also have to balance it off with the fact that now the people in power right now are popular leaders, which is something that doesn't. It's a pretty unique phenomenon, mostly because the people who tend to take over power are usually, especially when the military does, they're not usually... no
one likes them.
Yeah. But you find, especially in Mali, like for instance, the citizens themselves do not want to go back to a civilian government. Okay. They want the military, and they actually protested what ECOWAS did. So the sanctions he placed on Mali by ECOWAS, and the same thing happened with the Burkina population when there was an when there was a trade embargo on Burkina Faso from ECOWAS. They resisted it, and now what is happening, and I think this is something that is putting ECOWAS in a bit of an odd position. When the French now came in and supported the position of the ECOWAS and also gave in their own sanctions, now they start looking as if they are working against. They are working together against the population,
the actual population.
Yeah. So it's now upon ECOWAS to try and divorce themselves from the French.
External engagement. Yeah. Okay. So my final question: is military rule a viable option for government rule? Is it an actual viable option?
I wouldn't say so. Remember, how the military conducts itself is very different from how the civilians conduct themselves. Case in point, we don't even use the same courts, same judicial systems. So I think as a platform, as a road for revolution, as a vehicle for revolution, the military, yes, is especially this coming from now power politics. The military is a viable way to acquire power. However, now the long-term consequences of it is something you have to be ready to deal with. In that you expect a law. The first thing that happens when a military takes over the constitution is suspended.
As we have seen.
Yeah. So what guarantees for your rights do you now have?
Right.
As a citizen. So I wouldn't say okay. I wouldn't say I'm for it. However, there are times when it's necessary. If you look at the situation in West Africa, I'd say for the case of Mali, I would say it was necessary.
Okay.
And not that that I can't get misquoted. I'm not saying that I support it, but I do see the merits of it. So basically, on the fact of whether it's the military revolutions are transmissible within the larger African context, I'd say there is a chance in that 2020 marked a bit of a shift in how people think and in how at least people see themselves and how they see politics. And I think just looking around the world, just in what's going on in the world right now, you'd see a bit of it.
Yeah, there's a definite shift.
Yeah. Again, there's also the context of social media in that news is traveling a lot faster now. And if you remember what happened during the Arab Spring, basically social media fueled it. So you'd say that maybe there's a chance that we could have like now maybe a Sahel Spring or something similar. But on the larger African context, I think it will we will maybe see it differently, but not the way it is.
Okay.
Because remember, the Sahel region shares similar
traits.
Yeah, they do share similar traits as well as problems and challenges. But those in the south, the north, the east are not.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for your views. I appreciate you taking your time and being here. I hope to see you again and host you again.
Yeah, hopefully.
And thank you for watching. We hope to interact with you in the comment section. Kindly tell a friend to tell a friend and then share this with your friends. If you have any questions particularly directed to Mr. Eric, feel free to ask those questions as well. Directed to myself, feel free to ask those questions as well. And thank you for watching. Bye.